Good evening and welcome to our webinar on the benefits of mental health for athletes. I'm your host, Stephanie Dahan, and I am the event and content manager for SACAP. Right, so getting straight into it, I'd like to welcome Monique onto the screen. Monique will be your presenter this evening. She is a high-performance mental health coach and educator at SACAP's Durban campus. Monique has always been passionate about psychology, which pushed her to study in the field. She obtained a BA Honours in Counselling Psychology through UNISA in 2019. In 2015, Monique was given an opportunity to take up a position at the Sharks Academy as admin manager and student counsellor. During this time, Monique developed a deep understanding and growing passion for high performance and mental health in athletes. During the 7 years at the Sharks, Monique has had the privilege of working with athletes from academy level right up to senior provincial level. In the last year, she has been working with young aspiring athletes based at some of the top boys' schools in Durban. She's also discovered her passion for teaching and is currently an educator and program coordinator at SACAP's Durban campus, as I've mentioned. I'd now like to invite onto screen our panelists who will be chatting to Monique. So we've got Joey Mongalo, who is the head coach for the Sharks Sky Cup team. Joey grew up in Brits, Northwest, and went on to attend Pretoria Boys High School, where he discovered his love for sport, especially rugby and cricket. Joey is the current Sharks Currie Cup head coach and former defense coach of the Vodacom Bulls rugby team. He was a decorated rugby player that represented the emerging Springboks, Blue Bulls, and Junior Springboks. In addition to being an accomplished rugby player, he also holds a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology. He is intrigued by leadership engagement, team cohesive building, and performance psychology. Joey is not short of blessings, being a husband to Zinzile, his beautiful wife, and the father of two precious little girls who are his pride and joy. Next, we've got Tera Mtembu. He is a rugby analyst for SuperSport. He was born and raised in East London, attended Dale College, where his love for sport blossomed. He started playing the representative rugby in 2008 and went on to play for the Sharks for 11 years. In that period, Tera represented at national level for Blitzboks in the Commonwealth Games. In 2021, he took the leap and went to play in the US for Major League Rugby, returning once again to the Sharks, where he hung up his boots and retired from professional rugby. Currently, he is a rugby analyst for SuperSport, as I've mentioned, as well as the first team rugby coach for Kearney College. He has a passion for the development of aspiring rugby players, building and instilling solid values that he has learned along the way. Last but not least, we have Phendulani Phepsi Buthelezi. He is currently the captain for the Sharks Currie Cup team, and in 2019, he led the Sharks junior squad in an unbeatable season during the Under-19 Currie Cup, proving his undeniable leadership skills at the tender age of 19. Currently, he serves as the captain for the Sharks in the Currie Cup, as well as the URC Championship, playing at loose forward. He is also in the process of completing a civil engineering degree, following in the footsteps of his beloved father. Phepsi is also passionate about giving back and launched the Phepsi Buthelezi Scholarship Fund. It's a purpose-driven initiative intended to open doors of opportunity for well-deserving students and enriching the lives of our youth. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to the panel to continue their discussion and share a bit about how mental health in their professional space has helped them.
Hi, everybody. Welcome this evening. I'm so excited to be sharing this incredible discussion with you all, focused around mental health and sport, which is an area I'm personally very, very passionate about, and I've spent the last 8 years working in. I have the privilege of hosting the webinar and having an opportunity to chat with some incredible sportsmen that I've worked with personally in the past and now consider to be my dear friends. I want to firstly thank each of them for making time to speak with us today, considering their extremely demanding schedules. So before we move into the interviews with the panelists, I just wanted to speak briefly into this area of mental wellness in sports and why it's so critical. So we're all extremely familiar with the stigma around mental health as a whole, particularly the professional sporting space, where high performance is non-negotiable. Coupled with this, the reality around men feeling safe to be vulnerable and fight the stigma of admitting they need help requires a lot of bravery, and even more so, an understanding of the lasting benefits. From our experience in working with athletes, many of them are completely unaware of the difference of speaking makes to their overall well-being, and in turn, their performance on the field. I've encountered several situations where an athlete has been completely debilitated with emotion due to an event that took place in their life, which often rendered them lifeless. Now, all of us experience difficulties in life that we tend to manage or put aside, ignore, or deal with in our own ways. But there are times when something big happens, or alternatively, all these little events compound on each other and bring about a bigger issue. And this essentially impacts your performance. And that isn't necessarily specific to athletes alone. It applies to all of us, essentially. So not only is it talking through your personal and unique concerns as an individual, but also gaining tools on how to improve and work on things like self-esteem, pressure, the benefits of emotional intelligence, etc. So these are all areas that are utilized to create holistic wellness and development for the athletes. Well, enough about me. Let's get to the interesting part where we get to hear from these amazing men in sport. So I'm going to get into some questions that will be targeted at each panelist. However, if any of the other panelists have anything further to add on that particular question, please feel free to jump right in afterwards. So our first question is going to be for Phepsi. Welcome, Phepsi. So happy to have you here with us today. In the bush currently, so I'm glad that you have some solid internet connection there for us. So my question for you is, prior to seeking help for the first time, how did you view mental health or seeking help from a counselor, particularly from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, Mo, thanks for having me. Yeah, no, I must say, growing up in an African home, to be honest with you, I only found out about mental health when I first joined the Sharks Academy and started working with you. I think growing up, it was just a matter of, as you know, as long as I was well fed, had clothes, a roof, a roof over my head. I think that was, as long as I was well materially, to them that equated to me being mentally healthy. So, from my culture, I was never exposed to mental health up until I obviously joined the Sharks Academy and started working with you. And I think that was when this mental health awareness started for me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Peps. Does anybody else have anything to add to that question, Joey or Tera? No. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Peps. Amazing. Okay, next question is for Tera. At what stage in your career did you seek help for the first time?
Good evening, everyone. So I started at 26 years old. So 2016, I was at the peak of my career then, and also at the peak of my injuries. So obviously with my players union, which is something that all the unions have. It's an organization for all the players, needs and stuff. So they gave us a lot of awareness in terms of mental health. And I think that, yeah, at 26, I took that first step into getting help mentally.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tera. And I think that's a great point, is injuries. I think that's such a huge area where athletes struggle. You know, you can be going along perfectly fine until that injury hits, and then your whole future flashes before your eyes, and you essentially feel like, what now? You know, you have this whole idea of what's going to happen, and then an injury happens and all those negative thoughts just flood into your head. And, you start telling yourself all these beliefs and stories that you tend to take on board and start to believe. And I think that's when a mental health professional or someone experienced in this area is so critical, to be able to keep your mind on the right track and keep you positive, and just constantly have that positive encouragement and reinforcement alongside your rehab. Of course, your physical rehab is important, but the mental rehab is equally as critical. Thanks, Tera. Joey, okay, next question. Guys, just apologies for Joey. He doesn't have a camera, so you will just hear his voice today. As a coach, how important do you think overall mental health is in the performance of an athlete?
Great question. So I would say it's firstly the background, I would say, Monique, is for us to understand that we as human beings, we are body, mind, and spirit, right? So we spend so much time reading books, having conversations and that sort of stuff that can be mentally stimulating. We spend time in the gym, we do all sorts of lifts and we run fast, but the mental aspects, so the top half, we don't do enough of gymming the brain as a muscle. So for me, it's like a 33% spirit stuff, like whatever your spiritual stuff is, 33% body, but then 33% mental. So I reckon it's just as important as your physical being. It's just as important as your spiritual state. So I would say, sorry to repeat myself, but I just want to get the point really clearly across, that I really believe you as Monique, you've got a body, a mind, and a spirit, but we can invest quite a bit into our spirit, quite a bit into our body, but we don't experience near enough into our minds. So I think it's, if you want to get ahead as a sportsman or as a sports person, that's the place where you can get ahead quite a bit.
Thank you, Joey. I absolutely agree with that. And I think, it's become a belief that there's so much focus on the physical aspect, particularly with the athletes, because it's so easy to measure, how much can I lift, how fast can I run? And I think it's so much easier to control that, essentially. That's where a lot of athletes focus their effort and time on, and they tend to neglect the mental aspect, not realizing that down the line it's essentially going to be a crutch for them. So absolutely, I agree. We need to be focusing equally on all of those areas. Okay, back to Phepsi. How did you find your first experience with seeking help from a mental or emotional perspective?
It was a huge eye-opener for me. I'll be very honest with you, Mo. I think it just made me realize that not only as athletes, but as humans, we spend so much time worrying about things that aren't really in our control. For someone like me who struggles from anxiety, you spend so much time and energy thinking about all these scenarios that actually end up not happening. But because you've spent so much of your mental energy thinking about them, by the time you get to play the game or do that particular thing that you've been stressing about, you mentally fatigue, so you aren't able to perform to the best of your ability. So I think for me, that was my biggest learning curve, that especially going into a game, just focusing on the things that I can control, my preparation, not really worrying about the outcome, just trusting that if I prepare well going into a game, everything else will sort of take care of itself.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Peps. Absolutely agree. And I think, we neglect that fact so often. And I think it's so important to be able to even just have those brief conversations, before a game, or there's something coming up, just be able to debrief with someone and be able to get a few things off your chest, learn some strategies on preparing before a game to alleviate that pressure, and just the whole idea around positive self-talk. And I think that's something most humans get stuck into, is this negative self-talk. We tend to pick little things of events that happen around us. Things go wrong. You had a bad training session that week. You didn't feel good about it, and you just start telling yourself these lies, and they tend to just sink in and become truth. And that can be a real problem when it comes to you having to perform on the field the next weekend, for instance, because instead of believing in your capabilities and exactly what you are capable of doing, you've started to believe these lies and get stuck into a negative mindset. So just being able to speak with someone and keep you aligned and remember those positive things and being able to figure out strategies on how to do that. Absolutely. Okay, next question for Tera. Do you wish you had access counseling whilst still being active as a player more frequently?
I wish I'd started a lot earlier. I wish, even as a child, there's a lot of trauma that one can go through at a very young age. I wish, instead of, not to speak down on the school that I went to, instead of playing a lot of games, playing a lot of cricket games, or playing touch rugby during life orientation, doing a lot of mental homework rather. Because for me, there's, I guess, or what I experience is two types of people. You get someone who's underprivileged, has had to work hard for every single thing that he got, didn't have the necessary resources. From a sporting point of view, you hit the professional setup, and this is all a shock to you. Like your mind, your body, there's a lot just going on internally that you can't deal with. And having that someone to talk to is important to help you calm down. Someone who has the experience, one, or has walked that road with you. From a mental point of view. Then you get someone who keeps everything that he touches turns into gold. He makes A teams, he makes provincial teams, can't do anything wrong, comes through because there is that expectation that this boy has a bright future. He plays within 2 years, plays in the senior team, plays for a couple of years, and then almost hits a ceiling type thing. And then all of a sudden things don't start not going his way, not making teams, and that's not normal, and that's also hard to deal with. So those types of people, or what I'm saying is, I wish I'd started a lot earlier to be able to deal with certain things that you don't prepare for, because I'm sure everyone who has played at a pro level at any sport, you get told that you have the potential to be the best in the world. You have the potential to be a Springbok or whatever the case may be, but not everyone is going to get there. And when it doesn't, it's hard to deal with, because this is not what I was promised, what I prepared for. So what now? And the second part of this, I wish I started a lot earlier, will help me reset. We all have our goals. I wanted to be a Springbok. I wanted to do this. But in order to get there, at that destination, the journey that I needed to go through. But I didn't know what my journey was, or how my journey was going to be. I didn't know that I was going to have a lot of injuries. I didn't know I was going to get dropped and play off the bench and all these kind of things. So I wish I had a mindset of goal setting, which I did stop, which I regret a lot. At like 25, okay, this is where I'm at in my life. I'm not where I need to be, or I'm where I wanted to be. What is next? What's the next thing? It's amazing. You hear all these stories. Once you retired, you got all the answers and everything. I wish I just had that person to talk to, that person to hear me out, that soundboard. Because you get into a mindset of you're just going to work unbelievably hard physically to get to where you need to be, and you just keep working. You get a setback, you just work harder. Where I'm like, okay, to just reset, see where you are, what's next, how are we going to get to that? So I wish I'd started a lot earlier, because I didn't have the resources to see a psychologist or someone where I grew up. But I just wish I had started a lot earlier.
Thank you so much, Tera. And you touched on two really incredible ideas there. So one being, this kind of service being offered at a school level. And I'm privileged enough to be working in that space now. And I've just been so blown away at how some of these young men have blossomed when they've had an opportunity to speak and be vulnerable. It's almost like they've just been waiting for a space to talk. And I do think as the generations have gone along and mental health has become a bit more known and understood, these youngsters are embracing it a lot more. And it's just been so beautiful to watch, firstly, how they've grown as young men, how they've progressed, how they've matured, and how that follows through into their performance as well. And just in other areas, how they've developed relationships and a brotherhood with their team and understanding, you know, appreciating each other and getting to know each other on a deeper level, and how that impacts the team dynamic when they are investing in the relationships with their team members. And I think that's incredible as well. And another thing you alluded to was disappointment. I think that's such a huge aspect that so many athletes don't account for, is the idea of disappointment and how to deal with that in a healthy way and not throw your toys out the cot, you know, especially some of these really young players, like you said, the God's gift to rugby kinds of players. I mean, we all know in South Africa, rugby is treated like such a big sport, and if you're playing first team for a really good school, that's how you treat it at school. You walk around with your chest puffed out, everybody loves you, all the girls love you, you know, that's, as you say, everything you touch turns to gold. And that mindset can be quite destructive and toxic. And when you come into a professional environment and you are sharing that space with all the other God's gift to rugby, you just become another number. And that is hard because you're not the guy anymore. Now you're just one of the many excellent players, and you have to fight for that position. And for a lot of boys, that's a really tough space to be in. So I think that's a really great point you made there. Thanks, Tera. Okay, Joey, have you personally witnessed how athletes have been impacted when accessing help versus not?
Yes, Monique. First of all, a couple of things. Can I just acknowledge Phepsi for speaking about that he suffers from anxiety? I think it's so cool that a guy of his platform can come out and just say it so openly. It just says a lot about the vulnerability of the man. And I think for me, vulnerability is the new manly, or the new womanly, whatever you want to call it. The fact that he could do that, I thought that was phenomenal. And then, sorry, another point, I'm sorry to do this, I've just been waiting, is also to acknowledge when Tera's saying he wish he had interventions earlier, which means to me, Monique, I don't have to wait till something goes wrong before I can get into mental health. You know, so it's actually a tool to have in your quiver before something goes wrong, because then you're already strengthened and you've got a process and you've got a system that's in place. So when you ask, sorry, man, ask the question again. I'm so sorry. I got excited. I got focused.
No, I love that little extra bit. Thank you so much. Okay. The question was, have you personally witnessed how athletes have been impacted when accessing help versus not?
Yeah, definitely. I would say one of the areas, especially you guys mentioned, is when a guy either loses form or when a player is injured. So players who kind of get isolated, they isolate themselves because they're feeling like I'm not good enough, I'm not playing as well as I could be, or I'm injured and I kind of exclude myself from the team. You can see how they kind of regress in their progress. But those who kind of pull themselves in and they're able to confess how they feel and they're able to be heard, and they're able to walk within a community of people, and somebody said, no, Monique, yes, that is true, I can see you're not great in this area, but we're going to work with it on you, but the other things you're believing aren't true. So that sense of people opening up, you can see them almost get little bites of confidence as they go along within a community of people who are reaffirming truths to them about who they are, instead of believing the lies that can go in their heads through poor self-talk or anything of that nature.
Absolutely. Yes, and I think what you mentioned again there was the vulnerability aspect, speaking again into what all these panelists are getting into. And I think that's the gist of why I wanted this webinar to take place as well. It was just to also make it very known and clear that, you know, vulnerability is such a strength for every single person, but particularly in this space where, you know, these men in the sport are expected to be strong and tough, and you know, that's the expectation from society, quite frankly. And being able to be honest about your vulnerabilities and the things you are struggling with, I think is such a strength, because there's so many other people, youngsters, aspiring athletes out there that are experiencing the exact same things. And just to be able to hear that it's not only me, that someone as important as these individuals are experiencing similar things, helps me feel like I can get through, and that I can still achieve greatness in spite of those situations. So that's a really great point. Thank you so much, Joey. Back to Phepsi. Okay, so Phepsi, did you notice an impact on your performance as a professional athlete after receiving this kind of support?
Yes, Mo, I certainly did. I think growing up, especially throughout my high school career, I'd always have games where, like, you obviously play a game on the weekend and you think, yes, like, I don't know what I did during the week, but like, I really felt in the zone. Like, things were really just happening for me. I was, always at the right place at the right time, and then you'd have games where, people expect you to show up and, have a good game, but you're not really in it. You feel like you just a half a second behind the game. So I think after, having those couple of sessions with you, I think it just made me realize that there were certain processes that I needed to put in place throughout the week to help me prepare, so that when I get to a Saturday, it's not just a hit and hope. I don't run out onto the field thinking, okay, what am I actually going to get from myself today? Is it going to be one of those games where I'm just in the zone, where things just happen for me? Or, is there a certain standard that I can expect from myself? I think putting those processes in place really helped me get to a point where I could be more consistent in my performances. So, all athletes out there know that you're never going to be at a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 each and every game, but putting certain processes in place, especially with my mental prep, it sort of guaranteed me that at least for every game, I know that I'm at least going to be at a 7 out of 10. And then there'll be those games where there's a bit of luck, a bit of fortune. We all know that in sports, sometimes you need the ball to bounce your way, which then eventually equates to those, 9 out of 10 performances, 10 out of 10 performances. So I think for me, the biggest change was just to be able to perform more consistently over a long period of time.
Absolutely. And I think any coach would say that that's all they're expecting from a player, and any player would expect from themselves or hope for themselves, is just consistency. And I think that's where a lot of athletes find frustration in their experience in their sport is 1 week they'll feel they're at a 3 and the next they're at an 8, and they're like, what's going on here? To be able to find that consistency, and I think that's a great point, is being able to prepare yourself mentally beforehand. I must say a lot of the conversations I've been having with the youngsters at the schools and stuff is I would say to them, guys, don't go onto that field and wing it, because you can't do that. For a lot of them, they feel rugby comes very naturally to them and they do really well in it, which is fantastic. And I said, that's great, but you can't just walk on there winging it. You need to prepare. You need to go into that space, having an idea, expecting things to possibly go wrong, expecting to be disappointed, expecting to make a mistake, and how you deal with those things in real time is absolutely critical. Being able to manage your emotions in real time as well, not get aggressive, focusing on your body language, so a lot of them are like reeling because they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much. But, as time goes by and they understand how those tiny little things make such a big difference, they see that in their performance on the field, and it brings them the results they're hoping for. Thank you so much for that, Peps. Tera. Okay, so I'm aware that you sustained various injuries that you have already mentioned thus far throughout your career as a player. How do you think seeking help during this time would have impacted your mindset and progress?
Yes. I'll start off with a story or a bit of a background to my answer. So my injuries were the biggest blessing ever, and I'll explain why. So growing up, I had a lot of a big incident happened. I My brother passed away, who I was very close with. As I was 14 years old. Um, cried. I think cried in that week, and went to his funeral, and then carried on with life. Went to high school. Everything was going smoothly and went well. And a week before I joined the Sharks Academy, I got into a car accident. How that happened, I we were on our way to buy a newspaper for our matric results, and no one was drunk. My mate was driving quite fast because we were scared. We were just driving in an unsafe place. The tire burst, hit a pothole, and the car rolled. And what saved me was I put on my seatbelt literally 2 seconds before. I think that's the spiritual side of my blessings. So I put on my seatbelt, and then the car rolled, and my mate at the back passed away. The driver broke all his ribs, broke all his hips. So all I had was a grade 3 AC joint. And that's how I started my Sharks career. Went through the junior structures and everything, and then I was announced as captain, one of my biggest achievements, when I was 23. And there were talks of me being the next Springbok captain, the first black captain. That was the talk. So there was this expectation, because of the season that I had. So obviously I need to do the same thing in Super Rugby the following year, and I had my first knee injury. So I had a knee op during preseason, a 4-week injury, which ended up being an 8-week injury. So I put on a lot of weight, played 1 or 2 Super Rugby games, and then I had bone bruising, and then I was out for 12 weeks. Missed the bulk of Super Rugby. Then I had to play some club rugby, because of what I said earlier. I wanted to be a Springbok. I wanted the next Springbok captain, but I needed to be playing because of a lot of loose forwards that were playing at the time. And I did my ACL on the other knee, first game back. So I came back, played a club game, then I got injured the same knee again. Then this event happened where I came back too early, just before June. Then I did my other knee, so that was my third injury. Then I did preseason, end of 2015. I was looking good, things were going well. On the last day of the probably last movement, I injured my knee again. So it's at 25 now. So in 2016, when I was 26, then I couldn't go home. I couldn't spend Christmas. I couldn't spend New Year's with my family. So I had to stay in Durban by myself and look after myself. And I went to go and visit the odd mate here and there. And on the night of the 30th in 2015, my mate messages me and says, "Listen, come over for dinner." I said, "No, man, I'm moody. I don't want to be around people. But I'll probably come tomorrow." So I got up, got on my crutches. I was able to walk, but I was still on one crutch, and I had a brace. So I had to cook. Then I realized, okay, I'm not keen to cook. So I phoned my friend. I'm like, "Nick, can I take you up on that offer?" So I go to his house. We have dinner. As soon as we get there, his mother, so it's a good family of mine that I've known for many years. She's like, "Why is your leg bigger than the other one?" I'm like, Auntie Lena, it's just swelling. And then she kept on and hopping, like normal mothers, which is good. And I said, "No, man, Auntie Lena, I'm fine." And then it was like back and forth for like an hour. And then eventually forced me to phone Dean McKay, who's the physio at the time, who's the physio now, actually, sorry, at the Sharks. And he said, "Listen, okay, just grab a Disprin, and then go and see this GP the next day," which was the 31st. So I'm like, "Okay, cool." I'm like, "There's no need for this. I'm fine. I'm used to pain. It's normal. And woke up, and then I tried to get up, and then I collapsed and fell. My knee was as big as my quad. My whole leg was swollen. I could not put any pressure on that leg. So until Lynn fetched me in the morning, went to go see a GP. I think I was there for 3 minutes. She saw my leg and then said, "No, you need to go to hospital." Went to hospital, and the doctor there said, took out because I had 2 incisions where I had the scope. So took out the 1 stitch and then pus came out. So my leg, it was either I was infected or I had blood clots. And I had to go in, wash all of that out. So it was an infection. So I had to stay in hospital from the 31st up until the 9th of December. No, of 9th of January, sorry. So I spent about a week in hospital because I needed to find out what that was, what caused the infection. And the doctor said if I had left it a day later or 8 hours later, I would have lost my leg. Something, I think a superbug would have grown, eaten all my ligaments, all the bone around my knee, then I would have probably amputated my leg. And so that's when I started seeing a sports psychologist. That's when I took that leap of faith. And so I played 2016, 2017, played a bit of Super Rugby. Then 3 games into the Currie Cup, I did my knee again. 2017, then 2016, sorry. So 2017, played the whole of Super Rugby, the whole of Currie Cup. Then, so now I was on a good run. Now I've healed, everything is cool. 2018, played a bit of Super Rugby, played my first game in the Currie Cup, and then I did my knee again. So that was the 6th time now. And so I needed a minor scope. So I went, had the scope, and I remember waking up and my friend Lwazi Vovo, his wife is there because we were very close. Because my girlfriend at the time couldn't be there. So then they're like, "Dude, I've got bad news, but you're not going to hear it from me, Steph." So the doctor came, Dr. De Vlieg. So he came and you could see something's up. So I'm like cheery because I'm in like a good mood. And then he came and said, "Listen, your scope went well, but we checked that your ACL that you did 3 years ago is a bit loose. So you have a decision to make. You need to have a full ACL reconstruction. And I'm sorry to hear that, but just take 2 weeks, recover, and then you can make a decision. Because if you leave it, if you injure that knee again, it would end your career." And then I remember Steph started crying because she knows the trauma that I'd been through. And then the doc walked away, and then I called him. I told him, "No, doc, let's do it now. I've already healed. Let's sort this thing out now. It's fine." I think I did it a couple of days later. So dealing with all of that was really, really tough. And that's the part where I guess our supporters don't realize the trauma that we go through. It was why I said it was a blessing. It forced me, 1, to get mental help, 2, to almost reset and realize, or help me figure out what my purpose was in life. Someone said when I had my infection, because I was distraught. I was it was just tough asking those questions. Why me? Why is this happening to me? You know, the world or the universe had seen this potential, had seen that I was meant to be a Springbok. I'm meant to do this. I'm meant to play a lot more. And it just helped me realize what my purpose was in life. And again, I wished I had realized what my purpose was a lot earlier, that I didn't need to be a Springbok to be a successful rugby player. If it's meant to be, it will happen. If not, it's not the end of the world. It just wasn't meant to be. So it helped me realize what my purpose was and planning for afterlife. And I think to actually answer your question is to align my emotional and physical well-being. We focus so much on the physical being, making sure you're in top shape, but I just wish I had aligned my emotional and physical well-being and put the same amount of time in both.
Thank you so much, Tera, for sharing that story. Wow. And I think what was so great about that is the point that you made about the supporters understanding where you guys come from. And I think that's a huge, huge thing to touch on, is that, you know, there's so many supporters that sit on their couches and watch you guys play and make their comments and make their criticisms and all these things, and honestly have no idea what it's like to be in your position and the experiences that you guys go through and the struggles and heartache and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really important point that you made there. And particularly when I was at the Sharks, I ran the academic program, so I oversaw a lot of the academics for the players there. And I think that's one aspect you touched on, was that these athletes need to be so intentional about understanding that rugby doesn't define them, and that there is a career after rugby that they have to seriously consider. And just focusing on their sport is not enough. Phepsi will know this because he's learned and he's a very, very dedicated individual when it comes to his studies. Although it's taken longer than he would like it to, because he's been playing professional rugby, but that's okay. You're still on the right track. That's great. I think it's so important for athletes or anyone who's listening in on this to understand that the academic aspects are so critical, because if that injury does happen and your rugby career ends or your sporting career ends, you need to know, you know what, I have something I'm going to move into and have a career after this, something that I'm passionate about and that I love. And a lot of the athletes that neglect that tend to go through a very traumatic transition when it comes to retirement. And I think that can be a very, very scary space for a lot of athletes. So thanks, Tera. I really appreciate you sharing that. Joey, next question for you. Considering that coaches fulfill many roles and not just coaching, how do you feel that you have an advantage having a qualification in a background of psychology?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I would say that technically, so the difference between one coach and another coach, it can't be that wide at this level, because let's say you've got a new drill or a new play, we'll see it on TV on Saturday, then by Monday we'll replicate it. So I would say we're all pretty similar in that space, but where and I'm not saying I'm great, so where you separate the good from the great is the people who understand team dynamics. Because when you get that right and you can build rapport and relationship with players and your fellow coaches, that I almost want to say you can't measure how you can quantify when relationally it works and it clicks and it comes together. So I would say the advantage, especially coming from an industrial psychology thing, it's almost that understanding of how leadership and team cohesion, when that's done well, when you find the right leader to lead a specific team in a way that team needs to be led, is quite a big advantage. So I would definitely say that. And also, I guess, the ability to realize that you've got to, there's a concept that says you can't build before you bond. So you got to, on the opposite, you got to bond before you build. So I think an understanding, or at least a consciousness of, I've got to get to the heart of the person first before I can expect them to do something with their hands, if that makes sense. So if that's a way of heart and hand understanding that space. So just to wrap it up, I would say there is an advantage, because there's a sense of getting to the human, and once you have somebody's heart, they can do far more than we can even ask or think of them.
Absolutely agree, Joey. And I think what you mentioned there about the team dynamic and the relationship aspects is so critical, particularly in the team sport environment, because there has to be cohesion there. I mean, if you have a squad of players who don't see eye to eye, who don't really get on, you're not going to see much of a dynamic situation going on in the field, because there needs to be a trust built amongst each other, as well as a trust with their coaches. I think, you know, if the players really have a great relationship with their coaches, they'll be willing to go to the ends of the earth for them. And that's where you see the difference in their performance and the effort that they put in. So I absolutely agree with that. Okay, going on to the last question for each panelist. Phepsi, what do you think are some of the misconceptions around mental health amongst professional athletes?
I think the biggest one for me, it's, you know, often when you mention mental health around athletes, and Coach Joey touched on this, they automatically assume that, oh, is there something wrong with me? You know, am I not a normal athlete? And I think that's often the biggest mistake that athletes make. I don't think it means that there's anything wrong with you. I think as much as athletes we prepare physically and, you know, we work on our conditioning, I think we should probably put the same emphasis towards our mental prep. You know, put the same kind of energy into it as well, because I think, like Coach Joey mentioned, you know, you might not necessarily need those tools now, but, you know, you might be faced with the situation. It could be, you know, at a later stage in your career where, had you been working on those tools, you know, by the time you get to be faced with a situation like that, you already know what to do. You know, you've already put processes in place that will help you do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Peps. Tera, last question for you. Did you feel prepared for the transition through the retirement from professional sports, and what aided you through this process?
Yo, mentally, yes. I was at peace when I made that decision. I was at peace that I wanted to stop, and I've had enough, and my heart is okay. Emotionally, no. When it happened, I do not know what hit me. I took, I think, about 6 months to be okay. I think I suffered depression, guys. I'm convinced. Because, so when I retired, I made a decision to retire in January last year. I lost my dad, and I broke up with my ex at the time. So I had to deal with all of that in that month. As most of you would know, when you go through, if you lose someone in your life, you, especially a parent, like a lot happens in that week. You're busy, your mind is stimulated, and the blow at the time is not that bad. And once the funeral's over, then you do deal with what you need to deal with, depending how close you were with that person. But for me, it was a little bit different. I acknowledged that my dad had passed away, who was very close to me, but I had to deal with what I needed to deal with at the time, which was finding work. Well, I had work. I was coaching. I started coaching, and then I started selling houses, being in real estate. Because it's commission based, I needed to put all my time and effort into real estate so I can earn an income. So I went from earning an income to zilch. Okay, maybe not zilch because I coached, but I needed to sustain an affordable life by working hard in real estate. And then I started doing some work at Supersport as well. I started getting some traction. And I think it was around June June last year, for the first time, I could breathe. I'm like, okay, from a financial point of view, I'm okay again. I've got a rhythm, getting these sources of income from these different places. Now I can breathe. It's almost reset my life. And I remember picking up phone, and I dialed my dad's number, without thinking, and then it went to voicemail. I'm like, oh, damn, he's not here. 6 months later. And I remember speaking to, then I called Monique, or sent her a message. It was early hours in the morning where I couldn't sleep. So I took like, sorry, I took a week off. Sorry, guys.
Please don't be.
I took a week off of work. Now I needed to deal with losing my father, and it was almost like the adrenaline had run out. And from an emotional point of view, like I said, it was just a lot to deal with. And I started seeing Monique, and helped me through a lot. And then in a couple months, and then I just got used to the idea that my dad wasn't around, and life had just learning to live without him. So yeah, I don't think there's a set age, or when you get older, or wait to get older, or wait for something to go bad to start attending to mental health. Just start a lot earlier. I just wish there was somehow a system where we could start at school, start bringing that awareness from high school, because we all react differently. If you come into that professional environment, we all react differently. Some guys will take it seriously, some guys won't. Yeah, so if from an emotional point of view, I was never prepared. And in the line of work that I do now, and the mentorship, is try and prepare the guys mentally, because they know it's coming, but from an emotional point of view, it's such a big blow. Yeah, so yeah, that's.
Thank you so much, Tera. And, I feel so privileged to have been able to, be there for you in that time. And I know that you shared such a special, special relationship with your dad, and particularly going through that transition of retirement and so much happening at the same time. It was a lot happening at the same time. And, I think it's just so important to be able to pass down this wisdom now to these young men that you're working with, that you're coaching, and helping them understand and see that it's okay to be real and vulnerable, and to hurt and feel pain. And I think that's some of the hardest things, is that so many young men hide that pain because they're afraid to show it, and they don't work through it. And that stays within them, and it comes out in so many destructive ways, so we often see youngsters acting out or being rebellious or doing really destructive behavior. And more often than not, it's that pain that they've forced down and refused to acknowledge and deal with. And, I think from many people's experiences who have worked through their pain, can look back and see how it's benefited them, and how they can walk through life easier and a bit lighter after doing that. So thank you so much for sharing that, Tera. I really appreciate that. Last question for Joey. When one of your players are not performing to their potential, what contributing factors are considered in rectifying this?
Another good question, Monique. I would say would have to first look at skill. I think we can't run away from the physical stuff, right? So we've got to realize, okay, is this a skill matter? So is there something here that this person can work on that will help them produce whatever the team requires and expects of them to produce? I think that's there. Then there's a matter of understanding. So sometimes you've got somebody whose skill set's good enough, but they literally don't understand what that fits like in the dynamic of the team. So there's that element, and then there's probably an element where you have to look at, which I've grown in now, is almost a relational, personal element. Does this person feel like they belong in the team? Do they have belief in themselves? Do they? So those, I would say, belief and belonging are the relational elements. Because if somebody has got the skill set and understand what to do, but they don't feel a part of the team, they won't produce as much. Similarly, if I belong in the team and I know what to do, but I don't have the skill set and I've got something to work on. So I would say between one of those three, whether relationally, whether skill, whether what is the third one? So understanding, in one of those three would be. And I think a nice model to follow is good, better, how. So in each of those areas, to ask yourself, what's good? What am I doing well in those areas? And then what can I do better? And then what's super empowering is to answer the question, how can I do better? Because then you walk away and understanding, okay, I'm not doing well because, okay, relationally I'm doing well, understanding my role, but my skill is not great. So what about my skill is good? What about my skill can be better? And then how, in conjunction with the coaches and my peers, am I going to put a plan in place to fix my skill?
Absolutely. Thanks, Joey. And I think, that kind of speaks to one of the elements of emotional intelligence that I think is so important, and that's the self-awareness. And I think, I harp on with my boys about the factors of emotional intelligence all the time and building that within themselves. And just the self-awareness of being able to look inwards and going, okay, I'm not performing how I should, looking inwards and considering, what can I do better? And asking questions. I think it's so important because we all have blind spots. And, so many of us have no clue that we're lacking in a certain area. And you can't know what's going on unless you ask questions to those around you. I've experienced so many situations with players who have been so upset and thrown their toys out the cart because they weren't picked for the team. And, complain to their teammates and complain to their family and complain to everybody around them, but not once have they approached the coach to ask, what could I do better? And I think that's such a critical thing, is being able to ask questions to understand, because you can't improve if you don't know the areas you need to improve on. So I think that's a really important point. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our official questions. We're going to hand it over now to our attendees, who I think have a few questions for you guys. Steph is going to run this section of the Q&A, so she's going to target some questions towards you guys, and off you can go. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks so much, Monique. And just to say thank you to the panel, I think you'll be able to see with some of the comments, and even in our Q&A box, our attendees are very, very grateful for the humanness that you showed and the vulnerability that you shared with us here this evening. Just before we get into the live Q&A, we are very lucky this evening to have SACAP's Dean, Dr. Jacqueline Lotter, who has attended this entire session. And she just like to say something to you all, and then also she will be kicking off our live Q&A.
Thanks so much, Steph. I actually said I wasn't supposed to say anything this evening. I've actually joined this evening's session as a fan of the three of you, not as the dean of this institution, but I feel very privileged to be able to say something. I also have had my young son sitting on my lap listening to the three of you this evening, which for me has been such a great privilege for him as well. Monique, thank you so much for facilitating such an important conversation. And then to Tera and Phepsi and Joey, just thank you for your willingness to speak about this topic and to speak so openly and with such rawness about about this topic. I have no doubt that there are many young men and women watching this evening whose lives this will impact deeply. And I have no doubt that you work with many young men and women on a daily basis whose lives you impact without even knowing it necessarily. So you really are, the three of you, a true inspiration. So thank you for your willingness to share this evening. I said to Steph that I would kick off the questions and answers. Well, I won't give the answers, I'll just ask the questions. Joey, I guess this one is perhaps directed towards you. I loved your analogy of the 33, 33, 33, kind of 33% physical, spiritual, mental. And my sense is that there is an openness to speaking about mental health, but also investing in mental health at the professional level. My kind of wish would be that there would be as much investment as the percentages which you've broken down this evening. But I wondered about, Joey, your sense of openness to speaking about this, and Tera and Phepsi, maybe you as well, at a schoolboy rugby level. It's really great to see that there's an openness and investment at the professional level. But for me, these conversations have to start. The first point of contact has to be at the schoolboy level. And I guess I'm not close enough to know whether your sense is that this is being taken seriously at this level and there is a financial investment at that level. So I'd love to get your opinion on that, Joey.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Joey.
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. I think my signal is up and down. I think what I did get was it about speaking into these things at schoolboy level?
Yes, Joey. So I was just saying that I'm really pleased that there is investment at the professional level. And I wondered what your sense was of how seriously this is being taken at schoolboy level and how much investment there is in mental health at that level.
No, I don't think there should be a minimum age of where you can start. And I think part of it, Dr. Lotte, for me, a big part of mental health is understanding identity and purpose. So if we can, from a young age, help kids with their identity and their purpose, it's like almost like a solid foundation to build your life on, whether it's sport or academics or whatever it is. Because if you think about it, these first team rugby players and the guys that Tera mentioned, what sport does, you get elevated to almost an identity of who you really aren't, because you are this rock star at school, everybody loves you, and then at some point reality is going to strike. So whether you're 35 and starting your new life after rugby, or 21 and injured and you go back into how do I say it, like you get off the pedestal, the people for me who drop off the pedestal with the least damage are those who are saying rugby is what I do and not who I am. So I've got an identity outside of my title. Therefore, I can exist when it gets taken away, or I've got a season of life where it's not going so well. So I would say I definitely think it's not done enough, because how you see it is you see how those schoolboy heroes struggle sometimes to go through the whole system, because at some point they get to face reality face to face. And I don't think, unfortunately, they've got the tools to help themselves to recalibrate themselves when things get tough.
Thanks, Joey. Thank you so much. And thank you, Phepsi and Tera, for sharing so openly. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jacqueline. Okay, I'm going to get into our live Q&A just to our panel. If you do have an opportunity to see the Q&A box, by all means, you're also welcome to select a few. We do have a couple of minutes left for us to have the session. And so I think I'm just going to ask some of these questions more generally, if that's okay with the three of you. So one of the questions that we do have is, do you think the stigma around seeking professional mental health support is still rife among male athletes? And I think in this case, you can obviously only speak to your own experiences. Monique, I'm also not sure if you'd like to share your experiences with some of the players, or just that you've had with athletes as well.
Well, yeah, I absolutely think there is a definite stigma around it as a whole, with males, with people in general, but more particularly males. And like I mentioned earlier, in the sporting realm specifically, where the boys are expected to be tough and they haven't been modeled this behavior. And, you know, going back to my first question with Phepsi, particularly from a cultural perspective, where the stigma around mental health is even higher, and it's not understood fully, and it isn't discussed or spoken about. And like Phepsi mentioned, you know, as long as your material needs are met, then everything is good to go. But no one's talking about the pain, the trauma, the experiences that these young men are going through and carrying with them through life, and not speaking about it. And it's essentially impacting so many areas, being their self-esteem, their confidence, all sorts of things. And, you know, when things go wrong, they not sure how to handle those things. So the stigma is definitely rife. And, you know, things like this, where these aspiring athletes can hear stories about it being possible to talk about their stuff and still be a performing athletes alongside each other, is critical. And being able to know that they can get help, and it's okay to talk, you know, and just finding that person you trust. And more often than not, and Joey would know this, is that their first point often is their coaches. And you know, I think the sad reality is a lot of coaches are not equipped in this area, and that's where I think it's important for coaches to be upskilled in this space as well, to understand that they play so many roles other than just coach. They mentor, sometimes they parent, you know, they can play so many roles in these kids' lives and have such a lasting impact. There's so many athletes that I've spoken to who have said that their coaches were one of the most influential people in their lives. And I think anybody who's in a coaching role needs to understand the gravity of that, and be able to be equipped to use that space and, you know, give the best that they can to the athletes that they work with.
Lovely. Thanks, Monique. Phepsi, anything you'd like to add to that? Tera, Joey? If not, we will move into the next question. Is that okay? Was that cool? So I'm going to combine two questions, and I think I will just pose this to each of you individually. We do have two parents on this chat who would like to know how they help their kids through, you know, disappointments and letdowns. One of the parents have shared that sometimes it's the adults or the coaches that actually cause the trauma and the anxiety by how they speak to their kids. And how can they be cheerleaders without interfering or adding to the pressure that their kids are feeling? Another parent is obviously saying, you know, sometimes as family members, they might not understand what is, you know, required of their children. So how do they support their families, or how would you have liked to receive support from your family and friends, maybe in your personal opinion? I'm just going to go across my screen. So Phepsi, if it's okay, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I think I'm obviously not a parent, but I am a proud uncle. And I think I was quite fortunate growing up. My mother, so my dad passed away when I was 8. So I was basically brought up by my mother, and she wasn't really clued up on this whole rugby thing, on sports in general. So she never really put any kind of pressure on me. It was just, she was just always rooting for me to just, you know, go out and try everything that I want to try, you know, sort of just experience being a kid, you know. I think for me, what I often see from other parents, and, you know, to be honest, I've got mixed feelings about it. I think often as parents, you can put a lot of pressure on a kid wanting to maybe live out what was maybe your childhood dream at a stage. You know, you like, you sort of force it down upon a kid, saying, listen, I want you to do this, I want you to be a rugby player, I want you to be an athlete, I want you to be this and that. Where I think the biggest thing that I'm driving now, especially with my little nephew, is just for him to write his own story. So if he doesn't want to play rugby, if he wants to be the best chess player that there is, then he must go ahead and be that. And I think for me, it's just about supporting him in whatever he wants to do. I think, often people can make a big mistake of wanting their kids or their relatives to, to be something that they maybe once upon a time aspired to be, but couldn't really get there. And they almost want to realize their dream through their kid or through their nephew or through their niece. So I think it's just about, supporting your kid and really not putting any pressure or trying to drive them in a certain direction.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that. Tera, you're next on my screen.
I think parents can be or create an environment where your children can be vulnerable, and having, I say, hard, honest conversations, depending on where the child is at the time, whether it is through disappointment, creating an environment where the child is able to say that I'm not happy about this, but also in him or the child being in an environment where he can be vulnerable, help him figure out a solution. So be solution-based. You acknowledge what the problem is and whatever the problem is and finding a solution. And I think would make a big difference. I remember I didn't make the under 14A because I didn't have rugby boots. I was playing with techies, walked all the way home, like a 30-minute walk, and I started crying all the way home because I was so disappointed. And my brothers at the time laughed at me because, like, why am I crying? Maybe in a different scale, have that environment where I can be vulnerable and explain why whatever is going on at that time, and not bottling all those emotions inside, because once they come out eventually, you doesn't normally end well. But create an environment where your kids or the family can be vulnerable, and then having hard and honest conversations of where you are at the time. I don't know if that makes sense.
Definitely. Thanks so much. And then Joey, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I think for me, it's a massive thing around, if you read up on conscious parenting, and just consciously being involved, just being a consciousness around it. And ultimately what it boils down to is, I even see it with my daughter. Somebody said to me, it sounds countercultural, but they said, Joey, how Ziyana and Zenani are is not a reflection of you. And I sat there for a while and I thought, that doesn't make sense. But if you look at it, it is. They've got their own life to live. They're 2 years old and 4 years old. They're making their own decisions. All I can do is, once they've made the decision, is to support them and keep them accountable. So if they come to me and they say, okay, Dad, I want to be a professional cricketer, I'm going to say, okay, let's draw up what a plan looks like. And I'm going to keep you accountable to stay to that plan. But whether or not they follow through on it can't be, it's not a reflection on me. That's a reflection on who they are and the decisions that they've made. I'm sorry if you didn't get all that because of my signal, but I hope you got some of it.
No, that was perfect. We heard you just fine, and thanks so much for sharing that to all three of you. I do hope that's helped some of the parents or anybody supporting a young athlete or a current athlete aspiring to be a professional. Then also, we've got another question from an attendee, and Joey, I think I'm going to pose this question to you, and Tera, maybe you could also add some feedback. So how can a coach deal with conflict in a team when players no longer work together because of a personal event? So this attendee has shared the personal event which had occurred between the two players, and it was basically a love triangle that did not end well. And so now the players are taking sides and they no longer want to play a good game with one another. Maybe Joey, if you could kick us off, what would you do in a situation like that, or how would you start, dealing with that conflict in a team?
Yeah, that's good, Stephanie. And I'd probably put it under the umbrella. Well, I guess it'll help if they went to a boys' school and then there weren't girls in the school, right? But that's not everyone's solution. But I would say that there's a friend of mine, Sean Erasmus, is the coach at Paul Boys, and he speaks about belly to belly. So he always says you can't go anywhere before you can look at each other in the eyes and have a full conversation about uncomfortable things. So if that thing is left to fester, it already divides the room because people have different opinions about it. So I would say one is the coach and the two guys involved need to have a conversation together, because it's first a private matter. And then once they have sorted that out between the three of them and come to a consensus of what was right in this matter and what wasn't, and people have said sorry for where they were wrong, because an issue is never fully Joey, fully Steph. It's even if it's 90% Joey wrong, Steph has probably got her 10% in it. So both parties will have something to own in that. Then it would be great for them, the players, facilitated by the coach, to have a discussion with the team and say, the three of us have spoken, this is where we've landed, and now it's open to the floor for anybody who's got any additional issues on top of this to lay it bare. Because when you do that, the challenge is to everyone there must say they say, because once we say we've drawn a line in the sand, we can't revisit it, Steph. So I would say micro thing with just 3 people, then to the team. But even if it takes the whole day, we can't leave that room until we've said, okay, we're putting this thing to bed.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Joey. Tera, I'm not sure if you'd like to add anything in terms of your experience as a coach.
Not a lot of experiences. Fairly new coach. I think Joey hit the nail on the head. The thing that men struggle with in relationships, marriages, I know for a fact, is communication. So creating that environment again to communicate, have those hard, honest conversations. If it's between 2 people, hear both of them out, and listen so they can feel heard. And why they think the way they do, and then collectively come up with a solution which will be better for the team.
Lovely. Thanks so much for sharing. So I do know we are slowly, very quickly, actually, running out of time. So I'd just like to pose one more question to our full panel. And once again, I'll just start and go across. But what would be a positive way to encourage a teenager that has suffered a sports injury? And so I think in our discussion, we have mentioned injuries and, just coming back from it. So what would maybe in 1 or 2 lines be the way that you would encourage anybody who has suffered a sports injury and is going through the healing process? Tera, you're now at the top of my screen, so I'm handing over to you first.
Yeah, I think one, understand that in your sporting career, you are going to have obstacles, and in injuries, having injuries is one of them. Is always one, trying to find a purpose at a very young age, why you play the sport, why you in that situation, and whatever the destination that you have, that you set for yourself, reminding yourself where you want to end up being, whatever that looks like, whatever your story is, always reverting back to those values on that end destination in that period of time that you're in. Purpose, having a purpose at a young age, and always revisiting or resetting that destination.
Lovely. Thanks for sharing. Phepsi, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, no, I really agree with Tera. I think in my short career so far, I've been very fortunate with injuries, but I think just one thing that comes to my mind, just always remembering that everything happens for a reason. I think not constantly asking why me, just realizing, trying to learn from that situation, and try to come out of it as a better player, knowing that obviously injuries are part of the game. Do all that you need to do in terms of your rehab, be really hard on yourself in terms of your recovery process, but just know that it's all part of the game, and know that everything happens for a reason. Learn from it, and don't say why me, say try me.
Lovely. Thanks so much for sharing that. And then Joey, lastly, over to you.
Is this the injury question, Stephanie?
Yeah. So just anything you could give to someone who's suffering an injury, going through that healing process, something supportive, positive, that they could take with them.
Good. One of the things I think Phepsi ended by saying, don't ask the question, what's it, why me, try me. But sometimes a good question to ask is, why not you, right? It sounds harsh, but it's part of the growth process. So I think the biggest thing for me is acceptance, is saying, I've had a season when I was playing regularly, and I lived in that. I enjoyed the good and the bad of that. But now it's to accept the season first. So for 9 months, I'm not going to be playing rugby, because once I've accepted, I can start to look at what can I do with those 9 months. So I could do a short course in those 9 months. I could get to birthday parties I would otherwise wouldn't have gotten off. But I can never see the positive in the situation if I haven't accepted, because I keep going to what I wish I had this. I wish I wasn't injured. But then that doesn't allow you to fully live in the season. So I would say acceptance for me is probably the best part, because once you've accepted, you can start making solutions.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, so much for your input on some of these questions. I am aware that there are a few questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. However, we will be in contact with the panel, and we will try to get those written responses for you by early next week. Monique, just before we end off this live Q&A session, I do know there are a few people on this call. Some of our attendees are interested in, how does one become a psychologist or a sports psychologist or a mental health, high performance coach? So how would one go into this space in doing what you do?
Thanks, Steph. That is a great question. And I know that there's so much interest in this area. And the truth is that currently there isn't a registration for sports psychology. So you're not going to find any mainstream universities offering a degree in sports psychology, because of the fact that you can't register at the end. So it makes sense that it's not currently being offered. I am aware that there are cogs being turned in that area. I'm not quite sure on the time frame with that, but currently there isn't anything formally for a sports psychology degree. However, there are other ways of going about it and getting into this field in general. I think having a background in psychology is pretty pertinent, or at least in coaching. I think both of those, when I say coaching, I mean like mental coaching. I think those are really important aspects to at least start with. Going into a undergrad degree where you can choose a major in sports psychology is really helpful. Of course, then doing some sports psychology short courses that give you some of the main ideas. SACAP has just launched a incredible sports psychology short course that I worked on, and I've seen through, and it's got some really, really incredible material. So those are areas. And then just getting into the industry, understanding sportsmen. I think, it's also a misconception that you have to be a sports person to be in this industry. I am very far from a sports person. I'm not a sporty person at all. I grew up around rugby, so it's something I know and understand quite well. But even then, when I started at the Sharks, I had no idea what positions were what. I mean, I had to learn all that information. But at the end of the day, athletes are also just people. And I think it's really important to understand that it's just human behavior. And more so, getting into a space where you can possibly volunteer, surrounding yourself with sports individuals, asking questions, having those conversations, trying to understand the kinds of things that athletes are struggling with, that they need help on, that areas they need to improve. So I do think your first point of call is volunteerism, and that's always been my idea of getting into anything in the helping profession, specifically in mental health, is getting yourself into a space where you can volunteer, maybe get involved in some sports clubs, surrounding yourself in those spaces. Having a basic understanding of the sport is beneficial because it helps you to understand the person at the same time, because those people that are involved in that sport at that level, you know, that sport is part of who they are. Often they, you know, they eat, sleep, repeat that sport, and for them it's part of their identity. So to understand the sport to a certain degree is pretty important. Yeah, so there are, like I say, there isn't a formal qualification, but there are ways to get around it. And I think it all comes down to the effort you're putting in. You can't be expecting to get into it and be making cash. It's something you got to invest in over time, and build up a rapport and a career and an understanding of the industry as a whole. Yeah, so I think that would be my short answer, I suppose, but not to punt SACAP all the time, but there are some great options on the SACAP platform. There's a postgrad diploma in coaching that you can consider if you've got an undergrad, and like I said, the sports psychology short course, which is really, really exceptional. So yeah, have a look at those if you're interested. That's the best advice I have for now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Monique. And then just to clarify, that it is that we don't have the sports psychology registration in South Africa at the moment with the HPCSA. Sorry, I am aware that there are a couple of international attendees, and so I just wanted to clarify that. Right. So Garfield has shared some links in our chat box. There's a blog on why study sports psychology, as well as links to the undergrad that Monique mentioned, the short course if you are interested, and then also just if you have any further questions about potentially moving forward on your study journey. Once again, I'd like to really thank our panelists, Tera, Phepsi, Joey, Monique. It's really been a truly insightful session. We appreciate, just how much you've shared with us this evening in this space. And I'm sure if you have an opportunity to look at any of the comments, our attendees are very grateful for the way that you have shared this evening. To our attendees, thank you for sticking through with us. We do hope that this webinar has been everything you thought it would be. And if you have any additional questions, or you'd like us to send you any information, as well as the link to the recording, please feel free to leave your email address in the Q&A or the chat box, and we will share that with you. Wishing you all a lovely evening further. Thank you and take care.